I do want to talk about Mike Locksley up in Maryland because,
Yeah. I
I
put
was
that on it
obviously the big
just for
Maryland
you.
homer. Yeah, the big Maryland homer. I still got my Terps shirt hanging up over there in the background. I still love the Maryland Terrapins, but it looks like things could be cooling off pretty quick there for my Terps. So, yeah, I'm curious to kind of think your reasoning on Mike Locksley on the hot seat.
Well, listen, again, another guy I wanted to just start a conversation with. And I think Mike Locksley might benefit more from mega conferences than any other coach in America. Because how many times has he had a decent team on the field that I think if Maryland was still in the ACC or if they were in a lesser conference, that we'd be saying, hey, they're a plucky little team in Maryland. They got a nice little team over there, and they might cause some trouble for somebody in a playoff because they made a run to their conference championship in a Big 12 or an ACC, right? But they were in the Big 10 East and had to play Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State every year. They had to
Yep.
deal with Michigan State's good run for a couple of years. They had to deal with, an uprising Rutgers and just a tough situation. The best finish he's ever had was the last 2 years. He's won 3 bowl games in a row, 8-5, 8-5, 7-6. And he's finished 4th in the East behind the big 3 for 2 years running. So I'm not going to say that Mike Locksley has been unsuccessful at Maryland. I'm just asking the question, in a world where super conferences now exist, if he goes 8-5 again without having to play Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, does the patience start to wear thin a little bit, or is he built up enough goodwill that he can have a couple of clunker seasons even and survive that?
Yeah, man, it really just kind of depends on how the schedule breaks down. Like, I think the good news for him is, and I don't want to be presumptuous here, but I think a lot of Maryland fans are a little bit more understanding than the average college football fan because they do kind of have to just sit behind a lot of those teams that have built up big power programs and try to claw their way upwards. And they know what they're up against. And I think a lot of them realize that Locksley is a good coach, but that, yeah, sometimes just circumstances stack up against you. This year is where it gets a little hot for Locksley. Okay, so this is where Locksley, he's got to finally deliver. If he doesn't deliver, I mean, on this schedule, I don't know what else you're supposed to do. Look at the schedule real quick. Start with UConn. UConn may be sneaky, but they should win that game. Michigan State, you should win that game. Virginia, you should win that game. Villanova, you should win that game. Indiana, you should win that game. You get a bye week, and then it's Northwestern. You should win that game. So you should be bowl eligible before you play USC at home. Okay, now, am I predicting 6-0 Maryland going into the USC game? No, because I tried to believe last year, and I'm going to kind of sit back and hold my cards a little closer to the vest this year. I'm not out on Maryland. I'm just saying I think that they probably need to think about, what they need to do to fix the program so they don't keep randomly throwing up an L that doesn't belong on the schedule. It kind of seems like that's the thing with Maryland is they'll
That's been the killer for the
right.
Terps
They'll
under Mike
compete
Locksley.
randomly and just like there'll be a minute left against Ohio State and they're down 2 and you're like, "Oh, what's happening? How is Maryland in this game? They might actually win." And then it rattles off and it all falls apart and it's fine. But then they'll just like drop some random game to like, Indiana or something like that. And it just kind of seems like you can't really, go one way or the other. And I'm not saying these are obviously like results. I'm just saying this is what it seems obvious to see on a, any given year Maryland schedule is
Well,
you're winning
yeah.
games you should and you're losing games you shouldn't.
Case in point, last year they're sitting at 5-0, right? They lose
Mm-hmm.
to Ohio State at Columbus. That's fine. Then you
Yeah.
follow that up by losing to Illinois on homecoming and
Yeah.
at Northwestern. That
You
just
just can't do
can't
that.
happen if you want to take the next step as a program.
Yeah. And, to their credit, like if you are 6 wins at that point, you're looking at the back part of the schedule. It's pretty tough. You got USC at home. You go to Minnesota. You could probably still win that game. Then you get another bye week before you go to Oregon. That's a long flight across the country. Rutgers at home. Iowa at home, and then at Penn State to finish your year. You could go over in those, last 4 games. Like, I mean, over in November wouldn't shock me necessarily. I think you probably beat Rutgers, but you could go over in that stretch, and that's, a pretty rough ending to the year. So I think you just have to look at it and say, like, hey, there's going to need to be some understanding of what we're working with. Obviously, losing Talia, you're not going to have your quarterback you've had recently, so you're going to have to break somebody new in. So there's going to be an adjustment and a learning curve regardless. And, you're looking at a pretty tough back half of the schedule where you're saying, hey, even if we do start 6-0, if we finish 7-5 or 8-4, that still might be a pretty good season given the circumstances, right? So I think there has to be some understanding on the schedule. There has to be some understanding in the fan base. Go ahead and put me down for like a 2, maybe a 3 on the hot seat. But this season, again, could be a make or break for Mike Locksley.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I think the schedule is really manageable, and they got quietly maybe one of the best sleeper portal pickups in MJ Morris at quarterback. He was a backup at NC State, played a lot for the Wolfpack over the years as different injuries surfaced, but I think that he could be a real steal in the portal for Maryland. We could look back at that and say that's a program-changing pickup in the portal for Mike Locksley. So I'm going to put him in a honey barbecue right now, Garrett. You've talked me into it. I was a little concerned about the results because, again, whether it's Purdue a couple years ago or they've just had so many what-the-heck losses that you just shouldn't have, and they could be so much better than they have been. But you got to talk about where they're at in program development. I think Mike Locksley's done a really good job resurrecting that program and stabilizing it after the whole DJ Durkin debacle. So, yeah, I'm going to put him at a honey barbecue, lowest spice ranking on that hot seat. Things would have to really crash and burn for it to be a problem this year. And they also bring back quite a bit of talent on defense from a top 30.
Yeah, that defense should be pretty good. And they played well in stretches last season. Obviously, like, you're not going to get top-end production against Ohio State, so, like, don't worry about teams like that. But they played pretty well on defense in spots last year. I think you can build on that and build some real momentum this year. You're going to have to win a bunch of games to start the season. I think they can. If not, that seat could be heating up, though.
Gracious, how about that?